Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Louis Mick. I am chair-elect of DocSIG. You see Divya here. She is the chair of DocSIG, and we just want to welcome all of you for joining this part two session where we're talking about navigating the interview process. So just a real quick overview. Part one talked about CVs and job packet crafting. We had a lot of really great discussion there. A lot of discussion that then carried over into emailing back and forth. So really great dialogue. And then part two now is you have gotten the call that you're going to have your virtual interview or fly out, a whole combination, especially right now, schools are doing different things. And so we want to thank all the panelists for giving their time here to talk about what they've seen in the interview process or what they went through in the interview process. Kind of what stands out. We've got a lot of questions that have already flooded in, and so an hour is going to be quite tight. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here. And we appreciate everyone's flexibility with the time change and everything. But as we talked about before, having this on Zoom allows more students to attend here. So we'll go down in order. I'm going to pass it over to the panel where you can go ahead, introduce yourselves, and talk a little bit about what you've seen in the interview process, candidates that have made you kind of put them aside and say, okay, we're gonna go ahead and do a second round of interviews with them, or they really stood out in that process. So we'll start with Dr. Shriram and go from there. So thank you all so much for joining and hope you find this useful.
I guess it's me, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Shriram, and I'm a professor at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. And by the way, my namesake Shri is going to be there, so he's going to say something too. And we were in the market together. And can you imagine two people with the same name in the market together? And he would.
And we were roommates. And we were roommates at AMA.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we shared a room too, right? And so it's good to. It's been like what, 2004, 2003. I was in the market. So
we're getting younger, man. We're getting younger.
Yeah, I know. But thinking of the interviews and having been on both sides, on multiple occasions on the side of the recruiter, I would say there are three things that generally we look for, right? The first one is the research question on the area and the topic that you're working on, which is more a substantive thing. Is it something that people care about? Is it something that's going to give us some new information that can help someone make decision? And in that sense, you have to be very clear who you are speaking to when you are doing your dissertation, right? Is it speaking to a manager who can probably make better decisions? Is it more to a policymaker, or is it more to a consumer? So we have to be very clear about who the stakeholder you are writing the paper for or your dissertation for. And the question needs to be very interesting to people, right? That's the first thing. The second is, do you have some kind of subject matter domain expertise? That you are the best person. This could be something methodological, or could be some innate understanding of that particular subject matter. And the third is personality, right? So we may want to believe it's all about research. It is not. When schools are recruiting, they're recruiting a colleague, and they want to make sure that you are someone they can hang out with, and you are a good person. You won't rub people the wrong way. And I think those are the three important things that you should look for when you think about a job market interview. And I would just say one more thing. When you're framing a research question, I heard this from my colleague Aradhana Krishna many years ago. She said, always make sure that it's something you can tell someone in an elevator very quickly. It has to sound sexy enough in 1 minute of conversation. And if you practice that, that'll actually help you a long way in navigating the interview process.
All right, I think I'm next on the list, so I'll jump in. I'm Mark Houston. I'm a professor at TCU. I'm Associate Dean for Research, which is a role I just started yesterday. So I'm a crafty veteran of a day and a half now in that role. I'm editor of JAMS, so I see a lot of current work that people are working on, and I've been really involved in all three sides of the recruiting process. I was a candidate in 1994, and I don't want to moan because you guys are going through one of the toughest job markets in history, but 94 was a tough year. And so, hopefully I can share some perspectives from having, been through it. But then I've also been on the hiring committee side, and I've been on the PhD student advisor side. I was on faculty at Missouri for a long time, and then also at Texas A&M. So I've seen kind of all three sides. And, Sriram gave you, I think, a great list of things to consider. And I know we'll get into things in some more detail later. But my three are, number one, I'm trying to figure out, does this person actually love research, or are they using it just as an instrument to get a job? I want to hire people that love what they do intrinsically. I mean, ability is important, and training and all of that. But end of the day, I want somebody who loves what they do. Secondly, Sriram mentioned personality. I'm also looking at, does this person care about other people? I watch how they treat our administrative people. I watch how they treat our clinical faculty, just to get some sense of, is this someone who respects other people? And then third, I'm looking for some evidence of grit. Is there evidence that this person will, buckle up the bootstraps, or whatever analogy you want to use, but will this person put in the work that it takes to get things done? I know you already are seeing this, but there are a lot of really smart people who don't succeed in our field. And there are a lot of people who have solid abilities, but they work and they get great things done. So those are my three things: intrinsic love of research, intrinsic care for people, and grit.
I think I am up next, and actually it's a lovely segue because, as Mark said, he has played three roles. He was my advisor while I was on the job market, so it's kind of a nice full perspective. We could say both sides of that specific job market. My name is Colleen Harmeline. I am an associate professor at Florida State University, and I would say our three things, they're kind of echoing a lot of the first two panelists, so I'll make mine very brief, but I would even go a step further and say, yes, we want you to love research, but we're looking for subtle signals that you can command your specific research domain. And so being able to communicate it effectively to any audience member is really important. So we get very siloed very easily in this career. And so knowing how to translate it into a universal language is important. So you want to talk to your mom about your research, or your neighbor, or something like that, because that's the best test of that translation. And it might just make it better for you as a CV researcher to translate to a quant researcher, because then you're meeting as humans, not as academics. And I think that's really key in that standpoint. And so it helps you cover a lot of bases in that point. The second is that, and I think in my most recent months, this has remained truer than I've ever experienced in my life, but we're not looking just for a good colleague, at least at FSU. I used to say we were an amazing team, but we are actually quite a strong family. And if you could imagine what it was like to hire the people in your family, and if you had the choice on who you would want in your family, that's the kind of rigor that you're being held against on the personality. And I also do have a family by choice. I chose my husband, and in some way I chose my son. He's adopted. And so we are very much builders of families rather than biological families in our lives. And in my department, this is very true. So I think what Mark said is really awesome. And one thing I can tell you guys is some advice on how to do this is to do your research before you get to your schools. Know them, not just what they're researching, but where they came from, where they grew up, and see if you have points of connection with them. So, I grew up in St. Louis. If I see someone who also grew up in St. Louis, I can ask them where they went to high school. It's the most common question of anyone who's been in St. Louis. And so that's a big thing. And then the other part is non-duplicating. And so we have a department that we deliberately try to build respect for all perspectives of data and research. And so we want you to be complementary in that department. And I think this may be something unique to FSU. I know a lot of places are looking specifically for quant because they have a very strong quant department, but I have heard markets across the market that they're now looking for these more diverse perspectives. This is something we really build in at our department. We want someone who has something unique to offer, but also can connect to the others in our department. And so showing that strength that might not be the same as everyone else is helpful. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to know you guys.
Thanks, Colleen. So I guess I'm next. So I have the pleasure now with Nita not in the mix, possibly the person with the longest name here. So on the
I
panel.
beat you to that.
So I noticed I've been ordered in the list. So we've ascended the list of longest last names, and now we'll start descending that list soon enough. So as we always keep saying, differentiate, differentiate, differentiate. So Shriram and I, we've known each other for a long time, and so we were roommates at AMA. And so one thing that you should not do, you'll make great friends, lifelong friends. Shriram and I mean, I have a high regard for Shriram, but we roomed at AMA, and this is before cell phones. Well, at least we didn't have cell phones. So people would leave a message in our room saying, okay, the meeting for this interview has been changed to some other thing. So Shriram, please come by to this particular room. And we didn't know which Shriram they were referring to. So one thing you should not do is hang out with your namesake, but don't room with your namesake at AMA, which at least for this particular year doesn't apply. Okay, so going back to the question that was laid out for us to answer, I would say three things. In order to ace your interview, kind of stick to the ACE acronym. So at least for us, it'll be augmentation. So which is kind of in the spirit of what Shriram said, which is this a person who's bringing in domain expertise we don't have in-house? In which case the onus is about, are they capable of doing independent research until they make tenure, right? And if on the other hand, if they're building on the strengths that we already have, then are they sufficiently curious in terms of their research? And when I say in terms of their research, you don't have to be curious about your own research. You need to be curious about research, period. If I were to have a conversation with you in the hallway, I'm looking for help. And if I can find a colleague who is as excited about my work as their work and can kind of show me, offer some constructive feedback, that's magic. And that cannot be replicated. And the last one is enthusiasm, right? And so for us, we are often talking to candidates who are working in areas that we know nothing about. At least some of us know nothing about. But sometimes the enthusiasm of the candidate can be contagious. So it can rub off on us. So we leave the room feeling, oh my God, I wish I had written this particular paper, or I wish I was exploring a question of this nature. And as soon as that happens, you've already won a vote in that particular room, right? So you want someone to be an advocate for you, even if they are not necessarily doing research in the domain that you work in. And if you can help achieve that, you won your gig. And the other thing is something that I've learned the hard way is not every school is meant for you, and not every school was going to care for your research, and which is perfectly fine. So you don't have to go about trying to please all. The only person you need to please is yourself to begin with. So if you're not excited about your own research, why the hell should anyone else be, right? And so if you can demonstrate that, you'll be fine. Okay? I hope on that was somewhat relevant and useful to the questions that were laid out for us. But I'm looking forward to learning more from my colleagues here.
Okay, I guess I will go next. I have the shortest last name, and I'm probably the most junior guest on the panel. So it's really hard to add any new insight after all these wonderful, distinguished, more senior faculty share their experience. So I guess I probably know, still have a fresh memory about my job market experience. So I graduated in 2016 from Texas A&M University. So that was about 5-6 years ago when I was like you on the job market. So I also sat on the other side of the table a couple of times. So just based on my limited experience, I want to emphasize maybe just 2 key points, and many panelists already shared. One is emphasize your research. So there are many aspects of a research, but you want to show that when school recruit you, they want you to succeed. They want to see the high probability that you can make tenure in a couple of years. So for a lot of research intensive schools, the tenure clock is very short. So you want to demonstrate that you have strong pipeline. and you have projects in different stages of the development process. Some are probably past their first round review, some are deeper in the review process, some are ready to be submitted, some are in the modeling process, data analysis, or idea development. So you want to demonstrate that you have your own research program planned out for the next few years. So when school recruit you, they recruit you for the next few years. They recruit you for your future productivity. So you want to demonstrate that you can continue to be productive after you join the school, after you leave the comfort zone of your home school and your advisor's protection. So the second thing I want to tell a little bit is that you want to probably demonstrate throughout the job interview process that you own your research. You are an independent scholar. You're not a teaching assistant to your advisor. You are not someone who executes what your advisor tells you to do. You initiated the idea. You become interested in the topic, and you take the initiative to reach out to different faculty to find resources who can help you to succeed. You are taking the driver's seat, and you are moving your research forward. Because once you become a faculty, there will be a little bit culture shock. No one will come to your door and ask you to work on anything. You will need to plan what you should do and set your goal for on a daily basis. So independence is also something maybe schools are looking for in your presentation. They want to understand if you can answer questions well, that demonstrates that you put into deep thinking about the research implementation. If you are just somebody who takes guidance, or you are thinking through all the steps, your thinking process. Okay, the third point is that you want to demonstrate you have solid training. So many speakers already said, maybe you work with the right advisor, you have expertise in your substantive area, you know the literature really well, and you also have solid training in either modeling skills or how to run experiments properly, etc. So when that can be reflected in the way you present your results or you answer questions, and when you talk to department members about details of your research. Maybe that's more reflected during the campus visit process and less of during the AMA interview, because the two are still very different because the time difference and the format. So you want, but I think research have a strong pipeline, have demonstrate your independence and show you have solid training. These three are important. The second point, other than research, is also many panelists mentioned. I think fit is very important. So fit can be customized to each school. Many panelists mentioned you want to show you are enthusiastic, you truly are interested in the school. So then you need to first convince yourself you really want to work in that school. I think that's a two-way selection. I understand this year, last year, the job market is not as good as in the past. Maybe many students don't have that many options, but still you want to learn as much as you can about the school, about the city, about the colleagues, about the culture, read their CV, understand their background, understand if you can fit in, if you can be productive, can be happy in that department. So only after you convince yourself that you want to work there, you could convince others that you want to work there. So if you could just do your research and show them that you will be a good colleague, you will be add value to the department, you will be a friendly person to have around, and people like you, like your research, and you can add value to that. I think that would be really it would be pleasant to recruit people like that and have person with good personality in the department, because that's also a long time commitment. School recruit you, hope you can stay for forever. So it's important to show that you can fit in the department very smoothly, and also be professional, be collegial, be just be your best self. So be who you are and show the best side of you. Yeah, I think research fit. These two are the overall important points from my perspective. But in terms of how to demonstrate that in AMA interview versus on-campus visit, maybe the format will be a little bit different, and the techniques will be slightly different. We can talk more in the rest of the session.
Thank you. I get to be last, but that's great because I get just to answer a couple questions that are coming up on the chat. But I'm Sterling Bone. Apologize for the changing of background. This is what happens when you leave your laptop at home and your son gets on for another Zoom call. He bumps you from your signed in domain. But that being said, I'm Sterling Bone. I'm at the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. I'm a professor and director of our Pro Sales program. So we have a professional sales program. So I can speak a little bit about some of the service engagements that we look for when we hire. We are a smaller faculty department, and we are very balanced in what we look for. So one of the questions, and I wanted to chime in, while we recognize the standard and the currency we trade on is research, know the institutions that you're applying to if they have a strong teaching mission as well. Here at Utah State Huntsman School, we have a really strong teaching mission. You cannot get tenure if you are an average teacher. You have to be a very good to exceptional teacher in order to get tenure here at Utah State. That being said, you have to also show your research chops, right? You have to have that ability. But one of the things that we look for is, just as the question that Savi Sesh poses, is we're looking for teaching signals. So from the very first engagement you have with the faculty, we're looking with how you can present yourself and how you articulate yourself, how you communicate, how engaging and interested you are. So I love the other panelists saying, if you don't buy into your research, if you don't care about your research, if you don't care about the university that you're applying for, that will come through in your energy and your interest as you convey. We look at an individual, if they're making a research talk, of how would they be in front of a group of undergraduate or graduate students or even executives that we'll put them in front of. And so we're looking at not just your ability to present really incredible research, but it's how you present that research. Are you able to, as Colleen and others have shared, can you tell this story to your mother? Can you tell this to, an incoming freshman that doesn't know a lick about research? Right? Can you tell that in a classroom type setting? So that's really important as we look for candidates. We are a mission-based school, and we are very much aligned to our school's mission, our values. And so a candidate that comes in that articulates that mission, understands who we are, and can really show that they can contribute and build toward that mission. We're in an environment, and I think a lot of schools are similar, that we're looking for individuals to come aboard and be contributors and builders, right? We hire with the hopes that we will tenure and retain faculty. So we're looking for someone that would love to be here for a longer period of time. We're not looking to churn out. It's really expensive for universities to search and hire faculty, and it's hard to replace and acculturate to a particular college, department, or area. And so if you understand the mission, how you can contribute, the word I like to use is builder, right? We're looking for builders, right? Building a research stream, absolutely. Building students and their experiences in a classroom, but building a broader mission for the school are some things that we look for. So that kind of goes along with that fit as well. And then I think the third piece, it comes from my sales background, is that personal touch, right? Where you are able to really, reach out to faculty, maybe even prior to an interview, make a connection with them, start a conversation that you can continue when you're on campus, but certainly after the visit, a personalized, thank you or reach out, and not one that's just copy pasted from all of the others that you've sent from the faculty, because the faculty will share them. It's like, oh, so-and-so sent me a thank you, and we'll forward it out to the other faculty. And it's like, oh, it's just like the one I got, right? Word for word, right? I mean, that's just, good sales, good personal touch, right? Just to be able to have a genuine, authentic touch point. If you can't do it before, certainly after. And well, I think we'll open up some more questions, I think, now.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. That was really insightful. And I think we've got a lot of questions pouring in. So now we can just kind of popcorn whoever feels so inclined to answer questions, and I'll jump back in and ask some more. So this was kind of, talking about building and then building off that question. This was kind of a carryover from part one, where we were talking about how having too many projects going could be detrimental to, say, hey, what are you actually working on, right? You've got so much on your CV. But for someone who doesn't have a publication going on to the into their job talk and in an interview, how do you convey all the things that you have in the pipeline? And some people were saying that if you talk about a paper, you should be able to provide said paper within 24 hours, that you're actually working on something. So does anyone want to touch on how do you convey, I've got all this going, here's the vision for it, but I don't have any publications now, but I will in the future.
Should I take a crack at that? So I think there were two parts to that question, right? So one is how many projects should we have actively? Of course, on paper, it looks like having more is good, but it's not in reality. It shows to some extent lack of focus. You can't have like 14 projects floating around. It means that you're not working on any of those. I would say maybe 3 to 4 projects at your stage is what would be good. So you should probably have things at different stages. It's kind of what the pipeline would be. If you're lucky enough, you have something in advanced rounds or you're published, and something probably ready to be submitted or just submitted, and things you are working on in earlier stages. So if you have 3 or 4, that probably is a good thing to have. And the question of how do you communicate this, generally when you do your job talk, you can include a slide that does lay out what you have in the pipeline and how that fits in with your research interests in general. And you can also give some information on what stage they are in. All right. So I'm not sure you necessarily have to have a written paper to be able to talk about it. You can say it's an early stage, or you can just have the research question reasonably formalized to just talk about it. But one thing you have to be careful about is you don't want to talk about something too soon before you have clarity on what exactly you are studying and why. Because if they probe and you don't have the right answers, it can have an adverse impact on the evaluation. All right. So the problem with recruiting is that people are recruiting based on very limited information, and any negative signal will be amplified. So that is the one. So if you've thought about something very clearly, you have idea about what exactly you want to study and why you want to study, but you just haven't gotten to finishing the research, or the results haven't been finalized, that is fine. You can say what the question is and where you are. But
if I can pick up on that, I think that's really, really great advice, and I agree totally on the quantity. Connecting back to something that Colleen and some others said, so much of what you're doing during the interview process is storytelling, and I don't mean that in the making up, fairy tale kind of thing. I mean that in the sense of you're trying to help people understand who you are. And I think so picking up, Dimitri has a question over there in the chat box. I do think you want to tell a story about how your portfolio of projects at different phases. I agree, you don't have to have written papers to be able to include things, but you need to be able to tell the story. They may not all fit in a perfectly connected topic, but there might be a project you work on because it was an opportunity to work with somebody to learn a skill. And so that's why that project makes sense. But you need to think, what's the story? I think you should have a slide. You're either going to be asked verbally, or you're going to have the chance to proactively tell at an initial Zoom interview, at a job talk, a campus visit. You're going to have a chance to tell that story.
And I kind of piggyback on Mark's too. So I like to always make things very tactical. And the way that I would do this is I would make sure I convey at least 1 to 2 key things. One is I had talked about we are hiring our family member. We're also hiring the extended family. So a big part of your research projects is showing who you're working with. And so you want to put with so-and-so so that they can see this is the network that they're sort of buying into when they hire you as a candidate. And if you have, the other thing I think is conveying where you are in the project. And to do that, I would say what data has been collected. This is very important for strategy researchers to say, is this firm provided data? For lab experimentalists, you want to say how many labs have been conducted, what type of samples you're using for each of those. For secondary data analysts, you want to say what that data source is. So they want to see, these are assets that you're presenting to the hiring team. And so you want to be very explicit with how you show that. And then maybe even a brief sentence. And I did this on my CV. So on my CV, for every project, I had just a brief sentence that explained these 3 key points: an overview of the project and its purpose, who I was working with, the title, and the data, essentially. Oh, and one more thing. This has nothing to do with this question, but I talked about this idea of impression opportunities, you know, and this is an impression opportunity on this call. And I'm going to beg you guys, there are 12 people who have their videos on, 18 who have a picture posted of themselves. But it would be lovely to see more faces right now, because this is your way to brand your face to people who need to know you. And I'm not just talking about us panelists, I'm talking about your future peer colleagues in this field. So if you are up for it and are those brave souls, please turn your videos on. I don't think we care if your cats are wandering in the background, but most of us need human eyes and faces and head nods right now. So that would be really lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
lovely to see you.
Yeah, can I add to what Colleen mentioned? I think impression management is extremely important, especially for the AMA interview process. In the old days when we went to the hotel room, all the interviewers sit there for 3 days, and it's really tiring. You probably cannot experience that because you are really nervous running from room to room. But from the other side, they experience fatigue and sleepiness and everything that you can imagine. So you want to catch their attention, so they remember you out of the 30, 40 students they have seen after the AMA interview. So make sure you have something that they put in their mind, so they can say, oh, I know that student from which school work on which product or which area or which picture I remember. So that research is interesting. So I think that's particularly important. So you want to be very clear about your position on the job market, either using your substantive area, what product you're working on, or what research question you are asking about, something that's unique, something that people can remember you about out of so many students they have seen. So you want to, I know some we argue about whether students should be put into boxes, but people tend to put a label on each student. So where are you from, who you work with, and modeler or a strategy researcher or CB student, or which substantive area you work on. You probably need to be clear about your position on the market. Just give yourself one keyword about the topic of your research. I saw a comment, there was a question asking, what if we cannot link our projects using 1 or 2 substantive area? Then that will be a problem, because if you give out 3, 4, 4 or 5 keywords about all your research, it gives people the impression that you're working on different topics and which may not be related, and that doesn't help to build your brand name. So you want to find maybe some common theme to link your research, to just use a keyword to represent what you're working on, and try to convey that keyword using pictures or using story or use in some way that people can remember. That will be very helpful for the AMA. For job market, on-campus visit, that's less of a concern, because people will dedicate 1.5 days to pay attention to you, and will just learn about in depth what you're working on. They will remember you, because every school only invites so few candidates to campus. But to succeed out of the make an impression out of the AMA interviews, you want to be clear about your position.
If I could just add a little bit of color to what was already said, which people have articulated much better than I can ever. And kudos to Colleen, her powers of persuasion are clearly better than mine, with all these cameras firing on. So if one is asking question whether they have too little or too much, the answer to that is already known. You possibly have, the answer to that is yes. But if you have too little and if you have too much, think about your sales pitch is your job market paper. And so use the time that you have on campus or during your Zoom interviews to convey things that are not already communicated via your job market paper. So use that opportunity that you have with people to signal stuff that they wouldn't have gleaned from the 45-minute presentation and hour-long presentation that you've already had with them. So you're signaling things that haven't been said thus far. The other thing is very often the people who are writing your letters are communicating a lot that you want to say already in their letters. So if some of your letter writers are sharing their letters with you, then these are people who are experts in the field, who have experience. They know what resonates and what doesn't resonate with the market. So know what they're talking about in their letters and cherry pick certain things that they are articulating in their letters and bring that up in the presentation. So if you have 5 papers and your advisor is only highlighting 2, there's a reason why they're only highlighting 2, because the others are not sufficiently cooked as yet to have an informed discussion. So as Sriram said, don't bring up anything that a follow-up question make you look stupid. So when you've already won the first battle, you don't want to necessarily confuse people, or worse, have people doubt everything else that follows just because you haven't thought through enough. So I would just be guarded about what you share and share what you know well, and that's about it. Remember, it's a first date. You don't have to necessarily get the person for an arranged marriage right away, right? So make sure that you win them enough interest to invite you to campus. You can always share more when you visit on campus. Don't overwhelm them. We're talking to 30 of you at the same time. We have limited cognitive resources. So let us remember you for all the good reasons and not necessarily terrible reasons.
So Iram asked an interesting question about whether or not you should, after you've sent your dossier to a school, should you reach out to them to express interest before you get called for an interview? I'd be interested what the other panelists think. In my experience, you can do that. It doesn't have a lot of impact because everybody is kind of saying they're interested. The one way you can do that, if there's a small set of schools, excuse me, that you really are interested in, reach out to your faculty members, your network of people who are already in the field. And if somebody on your behalf can contact, if somebody I know contacts me and says, hey, this doctoral student has applied to your school, and I want you to know that you guys seriously are the top 2 or 3. I mean, that your school is someplace they really want to go. That's a lot more impactful than a student reaching out. Any other panelists have thoughts on that? Is it valuable for a student to reach out themselves?
I agree with Mark. I think the best channel would be if you are really interested in, say, going to Florida State, right? So you probably would take your advisor to reach out to Colleen and say, Colleen, my student is really interested in coming there. Can you keep that in mind, right? Of course, Colleen won't be giving preferential treatment, but I think this will be in the back of her mind when the group makes a decision, right? As far as the candidate reaching out to schools, once again, it comes down to if you're really interested or if you're just doing it indiscriminately. Doing it indiscriminately, I would definitely not encourage. It's first of all, it is not informative, and second, it can backfire. And so I think you have to be careful about that. But I think I agree with Mark. The best channel would be have an advisor or probably reach out if you're really interested in a school. Mark, is that consistent with what you said? Is it kind of?
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think one other thought I had, though, if you have had interactions with a faculty member at a school, at a conference or in a session like this, where there's enough personal contact. So Divya and Nand, we've interacted a lot at conferences and events over the years. And I think so we're not on the market this year, sorry, but if we were, I know her well enough that if she reached out to me and said, hey, I wanted you, my advisors have sent my packet, but I wanted you to know TCU is one of my top schools, that would be useful information. But we had the relational capital, I guess, for that contact to be meaningful. Otherwise, leave it to ask your advisors who they know at those schools that they can contact personally.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Krista, go ahead.
Yeah, so there will be a lot of opportunity. You will be reached out by the department chair if they're really interested in you. Maybe after your AMA, they try to gauge your interest, and there will be opportunity you communicate with them after later in the process. I know some students, some candidates, they tend to send confusing signals to multiple schools. They want to indicate they're interested. So they're telling a lot of schools that the school is their top choice. So it happened that the school talk to each other and find out the student has multiple top choice. And that's a really bad reflection of this candidate. So it's a very small world. And there are so many calls, there are so many friends in different schools. So make sure that you should be credible, and you can say if the school is really one of your top choice, and you can see that's one of the top choice, or if you can provide reasons why you like the school, but just don't tell multiple schools that's the top one choice.
Yeah, I think there are going to be plenty of opportunities for those who are more earlier in the program. When you have seminar speakers visit, you can use those opportunities to communicate your interests in the group or overlap in research interests. And then sometimes a recent graduate from the program, your program may perhaps have landed a job in that institution. That particular person knows you well, can be a good advocate for you if you are interested in that particular school as well. So you don't have to necessarily have a direct conversation with someone and piss people off, risk hurting your chances, but you can kind of use a peer network to kind of relay that information as well. So use seminar visits. A senior colleague of mine once told me, every seminar, every conversation is an evaluation, right? Whether they have a line or they don't have a line, or whether you are a candidate or not a candidate, people are evaluating you. So just make sure that you're always working with that mindset.
I was actually going to sort of segue into another question that is now sort of buried in the chat, but I think is related to what we're talking about. And that's how many schools should you apply to? When we're talking about this difference between your top choice, your secondary choice, and this must take a job choice, I think it's beneficial to apply broadly. And I say this for two reasons. Even if you are geographically bound and you will not leave this certain city for whatever given reasons there are, the job process is an incredibly long process. And so your circumstances can often change before you receive your job. And you want to have those options open to you, and your circumstances may change because of the job market. So you may have thought you were geographically bound and then meet your perfect match of a school, of a city, of a town, because of your fearlessness to be open to potential opportunities. And then the second part of that is that it's always better to have more options than less. So to turn jobs down because they were offered to you rather than to turn them down because you never submitted an application. And so there is a balance. I did do more interviews than I think I probably should have on my job market. I did 32 in 3 days for AMA, and Mark saw me nearly break myself to do that, and quite literally. And then so I do think there is a balance, and most of the last ones came because of my own insecurities that I would never get a job, and I applied to many jobs at the very last minute thinking someone has to hire me, there's just no way I'm going to come out of this without a job. And you all will get jobs, and the thing is, your first job isn't forever for everyone. It's very rare. Charlie Hoffacker is like a prime example of the dream lifetime FSU Seminole, but that doesn't happen for everyone. So I think that's a nice segue. We keep talking about these top jobs. Those don't have to be set when you're sending out your applications, but other panels might have different views there too.
I want to add to Colin's point. I think what Colin said is really, really important. I want to add to that, when you're doing interviews or campus visits, never talk about your constraints. That's my personal advice. So the constraints can be your private information, and you can act on those once you get the offer. But don't talk about your personal constraints either. If you have a two-body problem, you don't have to say it out to them that, oh, I have to be in this part of the country, right? Not there. It can only hurt you. It can't help you in any way.
I will say be prepared to be asked directly on some of your constraints.
But you're not supposed to ask. I think
you aren't supposed to. Yeah. I know it is supposed to not be on the topic, but in my experience, I was asked in almost every school what my husband did for a living. So for people who are married, you may want to be prepared to have a answer to that question. If I had children, that's also something you might want to be prepared for. If I grew up in a city or in the country, so you might want to be prepared to speak empathetically about these. Everyone's trying to fill out your likelihood of staying, so those constraints are going to be revealed oftentimes. So just be prepared to have convincing answers. You can say, my husband does this, but he's very flexible. He's open to moving, or yes, I have children, but we have lots of family who help us, or something like that. We're, making sure that you anticipate those, what could be seen as hurdles, and have a way of, don't be dishonest, obviously, but to think it through. You're going to have to think them through eventually. You might as well think them through before you're asked. And so it's nice to have that.
I think more often than not, I think in the vast majority of cases when people ask questions like that they technically should not ask, they aren't asking them in a screening out version. They're trying to figure out how they can best land you. I mean, if you look at it for just a moment from the school side, Sterling mentioned that recruiting is a very expensive venture. You're looking at faculty time and travel costs and bringing people to campus or whatever. Zoom reduces a few costs, but it's still a very costly endeavor. And one of the toughest things to do is to interview 25 people at AMA, have 5 people out for campus visits, and you end up number 2 on each candidate's choice list, and so you strike out. And so schools are kind of balanced. While you're wanting desperately to get a job, schools are also desperately wanting to hire their preferred candidates. And so I think sometimes the reason, oh, your husband does, well, we've got this opportunity on our campus, we've got this dual career placement center as part of our campus. They want a chance to mention that. Hey, so another question that was posed, there have been several questions that have had the theme of what's different between Zoom interviews versus in person. And I think there are some differences. The ease of having casual conversations and making small talk, and some of that differs dramatically. But I think there are probably more similarities than differences. And one thing that I wanted to make sure that I said as I was making notes of points I wanted to be sure to make, at some point in time in every interview, whether it's an AMA style interview, a Zoom interview, or on campus, at some point in time, whoever is kind of running the session is going to turn to you and say, well, Colleen, tell us about your research. And you want to practice that first 1 to 2 minutes. What do you do when they hand the floor over to you? People make thin slice judgments all the time. And that first 1 to 2 minutes of how you handle your research talk, whether it's a casual conversation or whether it's a formal presentation, makes a huge difference. Are they open to what you're saying? Do they understand your motivation and where it's coming from? But that 1 to 2 minutes, I don't advise memorizing long talks. I advise practicing what you say that first 1 to 2 minutes until you can deliver it just like that. In the same way that you practice an elevator pitch that somebody else mentioned, you want to have that 30-second tell me about your research thing. The first 1 to 2 minutes is critical.
And I would jump on that as well and just say that 1 to 2 minutes doesn't have to be awkward in terms of, do I continue? Because you might feel like you're rambling after those 1 to 2 minutes. Don't be afraid to pause and ask a question like, would you like me to dive more into the theory underpinnings? Would you like to see maybe some more of the studies or empirics? Or would you like me to talk about some of the implications? I mean, and you'll get nods, and then you can just decide which direction at that point if no one voices up. But part of what we're looking for, and I think goes on to an earlier question, is can you carry on a conversation, right? And it's important in research. It's important in that collegial family environment that we're all trying to foster in our departments. But it's also important in the classroom. Are you going to be that professor that just gets up and goes on for an hour and just lectures? Or are you going to be that type of professor that really engages and can get a conversation, discussion going? And don't underestimate the importance of anything Zoom, right? It's just as we've found out today. This is the new normal. for a lot of our teaching engagements in a lot of our universities, right? We might still, have an in-person presence, but I know that we're going to have a heavy online presence at most universities, right? So if you can't convey your thoughts in an engaging way via Zoom, in your interview, something you should be really passionate about, and certainly something you're passionate about, and that should be yourself, then, that's going to set up some signals of red flags. I also wanted to go back on an earlier question. I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late to the party here on this previous question. And it had to do with, kind of this numbers game of how to determine, what's the right balance. And I think the question Victor asked, well, why did you apply to our university? Right. This is an opportunity to maybe dive into some things other than just the research, teaching, and so service. I love to hear, it's music to my ears when someone says, I love to snow ski, or I love to fish and hike and bike. I love outdoors. First, it says that they've looked a little bit at our website to see that we showcase our beauty. And as faculty, I would not be here if I didn't love the snow, if I didn't love the mountains, right? And so don't be afraid to show your personal interests. Because at the end of the day, we're wanting to, just as Colleen said, we're hiring our family, we're hiring, our colleagues, and to know a little bit about what you like to do, what your passions and interests are. Yeah, you can talk about the research mission, you can talk about the teaching mission, but don't be afraid to say, you know what? I want to live in your part of the country. I want to live in your environment. I can see this would be a great fit for my family, for me personally, or for my partner. And so to really speak to that level, I think is okay to kind of skirt some of those awkward, and by the way, my HR faculty were just like dying when we were talking about some of the things that we ask in marketing, because we ask those questions because we're trying to sell them. But here, that's an opportunity for you as a candidate to signal what's important to you in the job. And it doesn't have to be only the job.
Awesome. Thank you so much for tying in some of the questions here, because we've got a lot of engagement going on. So tying in the questions from chat's really good. I want to acknowledge everyone's time here. We got about 5 minutes. I do want to sneak one last question in. I think it's something that we don't often talk about with interviews, but you get to the end of the interview and then they say, hey, do you have any questions for us? And of course, you don't want to say, nope, I'm good. But what are some, maybe just real quick points of asking questions can also say a lot about your interest and things like that. So are there any little pieces of questions that you kind of look for, and when they're asked, you kind of go, oh, okay, they are really interested?
I think in today's market, I get nervous when students are asking questions like, what is the teaching load, or what is the research budgets available for each faculty member? You have to know that in today's market, it's about, it's certainly a buyer's market, if you will, in terms of how we hire. So I'm looking for questions that are more substantive in terms of, what are some of the directions that the department's going to go over the next year, 3-5 years, understanding kind of the direction trajectory of where the school is going. Well, what are some of the adjustments or changes that you're making regarding rolling out programs online, or something that's more substantive versus me questions. I mean, the me questions I understand are important, and those will come up as you get into negotiation, but I wouldn't bring those up in initial interview, because that essentially says that you're just all about yourself and trying to find the best personal kind of job versus asking questions that really signal that I'm a team player.
I would kind of piggyback on that. Those sort of negotiating questions I would wait on also. But the signaling questions, you also want to be informative too. And so what I would do, and I would look at the university, and let's say you're a strategy researcher, and look at what centers they have. If they have centers, you can say, how do these centers function? Is there an opportunity for me to connect with firms through these centers? If so, I'd really love to do that. The center loves to hear that. You love to hear that as a researcher. The same is true for CB researchers. You can ask things like, I noticed you have a student lab. How involved could I be in that? Is there someone I could talk to about how it's set up? What sort of technologies you have available? This shows that you're going to come in and be a team player, like Sterling was saying, but in a very specific way to that school. Now you get into this bandwidth problem where you don't want to misspeak about a school and get in there and say, oh, I see you have this student lab, and oops, that was the interview just before this. So again, tactically, how I did this, I came from sales prior to academics, and I had, Mark remembers these because I was teased about them quite often. I made prospect sheets for every school I interviewed for that had pictures of everyone that I was interviewing with, along with the key questions I was going to ask each specific school. And if I was alone in the elevator, I would pull that sheet out and I would review it right before I walked into my AMA interview. On Zoom, you have this luxury of just having it set right next to you. So you actually have this advantage over in person. And it's very helpful because it helps you just not to get things mixed up. If you're afraid you've gotten things mixed up, change that question just slightly and say, I'm really interested in working in a center. Could you talk to me about any centers or the prospects of centers that you might have at your university? And so, but if you can remember the name of it or something about it, that's also really an awesome thing to do for your top choices, those really good ones.
Yeah, let me just piggyback on Colleen's point. So I think, we suggested that you need to exuberate enthusiasm about your own research. We are doing research ourselves as well. So it doesn't hurt to ask the person, what are you working on, right? And usually we are as excited about knowing about your research as much as we're interested in sharing our own research. And very often, as soon as you pose that question, you've just bought yourself 5 minutes where you can just breathe. You may or may not care for what we're talking about, but it gives you 5 minutes to just collect your breath and kind of move on to the next interview. You just have to pretend to be interested for those 5 minutes, and that's about it, right? And I think by now all of us know how to do that. We've done enough campus visits, right? Or we've given seminar speakers internally as well. So just use that opportunity to kind of showcase your interest in knowing more about their research as well. That'll give you some time.
And now I know what, when Sri has been telling me that he likes my research, and now I know what.
I do, Sriram.
When you're on the campus visit, it's a little bit different. So part of it, most campus visits, and increasingly with Zoom visits when you're a finalist, is you'll have a series of one-on-one meetings or one-on-two meetings with faculty. And my best advice regarding questions in those settings is don't wait for them to say, do you have any questions? You should be, I think one way that you signal interest in them as potential colleagues, you show interest that you're trying to assess the fit with the school and what contributions you can make to the school. I think asking questions as you go along, asking them, as Sri indicated, ask about their research, what they're working on. Or, you had that recent JCR, how are you planning to extend that? Or, it's having a lot of impact, talk about their work. I think it sends powerful signals, but don't wait. Sometimes in a formal talk, you have to wait, but any chance you have to ask questions proactively, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think add to what Mark said, take advantage of every opportunity to demonstrate your interest in the school. So even if it's your chance to ask questions, you should have done research about their CV, know where they were before joining this school and what they are working on, what topic they're working on, what methodology they're using. So you could start the question by saying, I know, like Mark mentioned, I know you have recently published a paper on this topic in this journal. Are you planning to work on more? So just tell them, I already read your CV. I know what you're working on. Or you could say that I know you have worked with the people like me who have worked on, just indicate there's a chance you can collaborate with the person to signal your interest in potentially work with the person. So find supporters in the department who will be people who see why you're a great enthusiastic rookie who will likely work with me on exciting projects. So just take advantage of that. And even going back to the earlier question about the tough question that was not supposed to ask about your constraints, you could think about how you will work things out. Maybe if they ask you what your husband is doing, maybe there's no such job in a small town. You could look at a surrounding city. You could say, well, I know my husband works in this kind of industry. There is a firm just 40 minutes away from this town, and he could potentially start looking for a job. So if you can show that before you even come here, you and your family are planning to work things out, that's a strong signal that you are really interested in the school. You are finding solutions to help the school understand things will be worked out. You will sort through everything to come here if they give you the chance.
I want to give one last final tip. I know we're out of time, but smile, enjoy yourselves. This isn't just the worst thing ever. It's also the most incredible time in your career to meet so many people. And it will come through. Everybody wants to be liked, and that doesn't just go for you, but also us interviewing you guys. And so when you smile at them, they start to like you more. And so it also eases the nerves quite quickly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, and on behalf of DocSIG and all the students that have joined, we just want to thank you all for your insight. And this was really just a wealth of information packed into an hour here. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. Good luck to all of those on the job market. Use these tools and resources to make some connections and go out and get yourself a job. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. We will be sending out the recordings to all those who have joined, and you can use those as you wish. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your week, and maybe we'll be seeing some of you at AMA here.
Good luck to all of you.
Thank you all the
Good
panelists.
luck. Bye.
We really appreciate you all taking the time and sharing everything that you know and have learned over the years. Thank you so much.
Good luck, guys.
Thank
luck.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It was
Be safe.
great meeting everyone. Thank you all of you who attended. Even at such short notice, we hope you learned a lot today.